Hello and welcome to Film Lovers. I'm Sonia Chung. I'll be talking to people who work in the film industry and who are also avid film lovers. Today I'll be talking to my friend who's been on the show a few times, Tom Jolliffe. Hello, Tom. How are you?
Hi, Sonia. I'm very good, thank you. Happy to be back.
You've been on a few times now, haven't you?
Yeah, I feel like a part of the furniture now.
You are. Well, you're welcome back anytime you want. So you haven't been very well lately, have you?
No, just a spot of man flu, but not COVID. So I'll
Well,
be
that's good.
thankful for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so why don't you I'll tell you what, you can tell everyone what we're going to do today. We're going to do a sort of nerdy version of Film Lovers, and we're going to kind of cover the nitty-gritty of film theory, aren't we? So do you want to quickly
Yeah.
explain what that entails? So we're going to cover what we're going to cover. What's it called?
So today we're going to cover mise en scène,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which isn't doesn't it sounds a bit like a Japanese soup, but it's not.
It's
It's a
French.
term about basically it means anything that is kind of within the frame of the camera, including the music as well. So this can be a whole selection of things, and the most easy way to say it is that anything you see on screen, including the music as well that you hear, is mise en scène. So this is set design, colors, cinematography, lighting, the actors, the shot choice, their placement. So there's all these kind of different reasons why certain things are the way they are,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
And I
all
should
within.
also point out that mise en scène is actually French, obviously it
Yeah.
sounds, and it means putting on stage.
Yeah, so it basically it derived from sort of theatre,
Yeah.
which meant where the actors would be placed within a set,
And
and
what
then
you
that
see.
yeah that got translated over to film
Mm.
with much more broader meanings, really, because obviously film is more of it's more varied and diverse than what you do on stage.
Yeah, and you can do much more. So
Yeah,
let me quickly go through it. I'm going to have to try and channel what I learned at college, which was a very, very long time ago when I was a teenager, when I did my 2-year BTEC Media Studies course, and we had to cover film theory as well. So you must have studied film theory as well at some point, no? Did you go to?
I did. Yeah, I did study because I studied film at university and also in college.
Okay.
So yeah, we covered sort of mise en scène, and then everything within that kind of split into categories. So like the
Yeah, yeah, because it
cinematography.
entails it's a broad
Yeah,
spectrum, isn't it? So, so
yeah.
I'll tell you what we'll do is quickly then, if I quickly go through the things it entails, and then you can quickly give them like a definition, and then what we'll do is we'll break it down and give examples of films that use them and films that don't use them. So, can you first of all explain what is narrative?
So this will be the story within the film.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so obviously this can be told by basically. So let's say Neo in the Matrix. That's your narrative there. So he discovers that he's in an artificial world.
Mm-hmm.
So what you would do with the mise en scène is how do you tell that story on camera, on
Yeah,
screen, through your kind of visuals, and also potentially through your music as well.
yeah, and isn't it
Yeah,
basically like cause and effect, isn't it? So
yeah, that's part of it as well.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So it's basically like the narrative, the plot of the story. So this happens as a result of this causing this. It's always cause and effect that makes up the narrative. So we'll get back to that in more detail in a bit later. Other things to break down is what is a match cut, or is it a graphic match cut? Do you know how to explain that?
uh,
Okay.
no, not really.
No, do you want me to
What
do
would
it?
be? Yeah,
So match cut is basically it's a very clever way of maybe putting two different time set periods of time together by just having, like, for instance, I try and think of example. So you can have a picture of a circle, um, just any circle, and then the next picture can be a sun, and it's in the same shape. But
Yeah.
basically, it's
So yeah, like almost like transitions, how you
yeah,
would
yeah.
transition.
And a good way of quickly using an example, we'll get back to it later as well, is that famous shot of Stanley Kubrick's Space Odyssey 2001, right? Where
Yeah,
the ape throws something up into the
the
air.
the bone that turns into the
That's it. And
spaceship.
then
Yeah,
later on, you see it turn into the spaceship, which is of the same
yeah,
shape. And it's basically, I'm trying to think, yeah, it's transitioning between two different time frames. So it's the dawn of man, and then it goes on to much, much, much later when there's like these astronauts in space. So it's a clever way of differentiating um, two
yeah,
different time periods. It can mean, or it can be anything. It can be from two different locations. It can be absolutely anything. It's going from one thing to another thing, but linking them together. So that's a good way
yeah.
of doing it. And we'll get back to more examples of that in a bit. Another example, can you explain what crossing the axis line is? That's a very important one.
Okay, so if you imagine uh, looking at the wall ahead of you,
Hmm.
and you imagine two people looking at each other, so you have someone on the right looking to the person on the left, and vice versa. So if you were doing a dialogue scene, if you're the camera person, you would stay on, the side that you are. You would never cross on the other side because, uh, the person. So if you're cutting between two people, the person who's looking right to left, say, you would always want them looking right to left. So you would stay within the kind of 90 degrees of them,
Mm,
and then the other person would be looking left to right.
yeah.
So if you went all the way around them, the person looking right to left would now be looking left to right. So if you were cutting that way by jumping the axis line, it would be quite jarring.
Yeah.
You could
And
get an
there,
effect where, yeah,
yeah, and there are, we'll get to that in a bit later as well, more
yeah. But
detail.
obviously, you can break the rule if you want to kind of,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
That's what we'll get to in
discombobulate
a
your
bit. So
audience.
you
Yeah,
can actually use it, but there has to be a reason why you have to use it. And usually
yeah,
to use it, like you said, it can be very jarring to see because it's quite confusing for the audience. But usually it's kind of
yeah,
used to basically cause a kind of disorientation, isn't it? To make
yeah.
people feel uncomfortable, which is what the story is trying to make you feel. So, so we'll get to that in a bit. Is there anything else we can use quickly in terminology of film theory that I haven't covered? We've done narrative, match cuts, um, and crossing the axis line,
Yeah. I mean,
and
there's so many. You could do set
yeah,
design, production design,
yeah.
color theory as well is another one.
Okay, yeah, we
The
never really
reasoning for the
covered that,
color.
so we
Yeah.
can you can cover that too. So I tell you what, let's start with the three we just covered and break it down, and then we can just do the rest of it all on mise en scène, which can basically be absolutely anything that's entailed into the vision. So what we actually see and hear, and how it's like put
Yeah.
together, like you said, like the costumes, the
Yeah.
colors,
We can, yeah, give a few examples as
yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah. So we'll start with the sort of the basics. So what was the first example we used? Narrative.
Match narrative. Yeah. Yeah.
Narrative. All right. So basically we said that narrative is cause and effect. So usually when we see a film, it runs in what's called a linear sequence, isn't it? Linear narrative. So it
Yeah.
usually follows in like a realistic time frame. So, for instance, if it's set in the past, it will just carry on going on in the past. Um, but then there are examples, and we'll get to that in a bit, where you can actually mix it all up completely. Um, so, if you give some examples of films that follow a linear pattern narrative, and then you can give some examples of a non-linear narrative. So ones that don't follow in a specific, and they might jump backwards and forwards, or they'll be very
Yeah.
confusing. So give some examples of ones that follow a very traditional narrative story in a plot type theory that's basically running along
Yeah.
the same time period, and it makes more sense. It's like a normal book, basically. It goes from the beginning to the end. Sorry, the beginning, the middle, and the end. Whereas a non-linear is basically all jumbled up, so you can have the middle or the beginning, and then it can be all over the all over
Yeah.
the place, basically. So
Yeah.
So take it away.
Okay, so I'll do something Christmas themed, as we're almost at Christmas as well.
Okay.
So Die Hard. So this
Okay.
is quite, your kind of basic narrative. It's basically set over the course of one night. So this is a very kind of, there's no jumping in time really at all.
Mhm.
It's very kind of here and now. So obviously John McClane, Bruce Willis, arrives at this corporate building to meet his wife. He's just flown in from, I think he's a New York cop. He's flown to LA or vice versa
Yeah.
because his wife's moved away and they're kind of estranged.
Mm.
Obviously, he runs into trouble because terrorists happen to be taking over the building at the same time.
As they do.
As they do. So, he becomes this kind of, reluctant hero almost, where he has to kind of save the day because he's not really, people don't really know he's there,
Mm.
obviously, aside from a few hand. So he's an unexpected fly in the ointment for Alan Rickman.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Die Hard is really clever because in terms of, cause and effect and things like that, there's a lot of interesting narrative techniques that they use, including things like setups and payoffs.
Mm.
So there's this whole bit in the beginning which he's on the plane talking to this guy, and he doesn't like flying. This guy, the other guy he's talking to, is a businessman who flies regularly, and he says, "Right, I've got a tip for you. When you get to your hotel or whatever, take off your socks and just make fists with your toes on the carpet." And it'll make you feel better. You lose your jet lag. So Bruce Willis tries this, and this is obviously what leads to him running around most of the movie barefoot.
Oh, okay.
The other setup and payoff as well is this: he finds himself trapped in an office suite with glass everywhere, and obviously this is where Alan Rickman says that famous line, "Shoot the glass."
Yeah.
So Alan Rickman and his henchmen shoot the glass everywhere, and Bruce Willis has got no shoes on or socks. So, he ends up, with his feet, full of glass.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just there's things like that littered throughout Die Hard. And
Yeah.
it's very much a sort of beginning, middle, end movie.
Well, it's easy to follow, isn't it? Because it's
Yeah,
basically set all in the present, and it starts off
yeah,
with, it sets the scene, which is usually how Mise En Scene is. So it starts off setting a scene and introducing the main character. And then as we go along, we begin to realize that, he's going to visit his estranged wife, who they basically separated, etc., etc. And there's all these little bits that sort of come into the thing to make it what it is as it gets along into the middle, coming off into the end. So it's a very simple storyline, isn't it? Because it goes from basically A to B
yeah,
to C. So, and it's very easy to
yeah.
follow.
And
Um,
because it's that immediate time period, so it's like,
yeah,
you're not jumping through days or weeks, which can
no,
happen sometimes. It's just, set over the course of a few hours.
yeah,
So it's not quite real time, but almost.
no, exactly.
Yeah.
It's easy to follow. Um, and most films tend to do that as well, don't they?
Yeah,
Um,
that's the general,
yeah, that's the general kind of rule. All right, let's get on to the more interesting side of it. Can you think of films that do not follow a linear pattern? So they go into a non-linear pattern. So they can start from, for instance, the end and then jump into the present and then jump into the middle and then jump back into the
yeah,
end. I think we know of some examples. We were talking about them earlier.
we do. Yeah, I mean, obviously Tarantino is
He's
quite
very well known
famous
for
for
that.
this, isn't he? Yeah.
Yeah. Give some
Um,
examples.
so Reservoir Dogs,
That's a really good example.
you kind of start on a, you start at the beginning, kind of, with this
Yeah.
opening cafe scene, which is kind of like, it doesn't really say a lot. It's kind of almost, you don't almost need it, which is quite famous for Tarantino, where he's got these things where, most directors wouldn't have something like this, just a simple
No.
dialogue scene where they're
And
not,
it's sort of present
but it builds sort of
past,
character.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's the
It's quite
past. And
hard to, if you had a drawing line on it, it's
yeah,
something that's already happened. So it's kind of like if I don't know if you ever did like a TEF. Oh, you did a TEFL, didn't you? You did like me, Well, we had to learn the grammar structure. So you have like along the way you'll have like, oh, I can't even remember. It's so confusing. Like you have the
Yeah.
present and then you have the
Present, past,
conditional.
simple, and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and it gets quite confusing. So in a way, he's kind of like that because it sort of starts from, I guess you could say, the just past present, if that makes sense. And then
Yeah, it's sort of, and then it cuts straight into the aftermath of like a heist gone wrong.
so it's kind of it's
Yeah,
back into the present, so into the present, isn't it? Is it?
yeah, and
Yeah.
well, it's difficult with this one because obviously the present could be when they arrive at the getaway area, the sort of
Yeah, yeah.
meeting point. So even that bit where you cut straight into the heist gone wrong and everyone's escaping, that could still be the past.
Yes.
Yeah, so the present tends to be where Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, and Steve Buscemi, uh,
Yeah,
where they meet up at the sort of extraction point, the getaway point.
yeah. So that's
Right,
that's what's
yeah,
happening, like it quote
that's kind of the
now.
now, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And then they start cutting back to sort of reveal a few more character things and things that have happened.
yeah. So like
Yeah,
when the father basically talks to each individual and you get a bit of their background, so it's kind of
yeah,
going back into the person
yeah.
again. So it's kind of flicking all over the place, isn't it? And it can be quite
It is, yeah.
disorientating.
Yeah, but I mean, it sort of gets clearer as you go along, and by
Yeah,
the time it's sort of ended, everything's come together quite nicely.
yeah.
But I
Uh,
think what it does, it takes quite a simple plot outline and makes it more kind of complex.
mm, yeah, because it's not just like a bunch of men running around, um, you know, causing havoc and it's a
Yeah,
heist film. You actually you sort of go into their backgrounds. So
yeah,
that's kind of why that structure
and it
is
kind of makes
works really
sense
well
because
for it, doesn't it?
Harvey Keitel and Steve Buscemi are kind of trying to make sense of everything, so it almost makes sense that while they're kind of configuring things in their head, the film is cutting back to fill in more gaps
Yeah,
as well at the same time.
yeah. I mean, if you think about it, that's kind of what happens in real life when if something happens and you kind of go over it and think, well, I wonder why this happened and I wonder why that happened. You kind of find yourself jumping back to it to see if you missed anything. Do you know what I mean? Missed any
Yeah,
clues or so
yeah.
it's quite clever in that fact. So that's a good example. Pulp Fiction's another good example, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's very similar in terms
Mm.
of the structure. Yeah.
Um, can you give an example? Like where does it start off? To be honest, I haven't seen it. So
Uh, so Pulp Fiction, if I remember, I think that starts off with like a cafe scene again. And this is Tim Roth again. I think it's Tim
mm,
Roth. And then it breaks out into they end up being, they're armed robbers basically. And they take the room hostage.
yeah.
So then, they're introduced and then it breaks into, introducing the other characters. And then it takes its time to introduce
Yeah.
three or four individual stories that all kind of interlink.
Okay.
Yeah,
Where's the bit where Bruce Willis shoots John Travolta? That's the end. That's the beginning, isn't it?
that's somewhere in the middle. So
Yeah.
you've got that kind of so John Travolta's fate whilst we're cutting back to seeing his story continuing, which is quite an interesting
Yeah.
filmic technique, I thought.
Yeah.
'Cause it's like he's got this whole thing with Uma Thurman,
Yeah.
and then you kind of know that eventually it's going to lead to some kind of sort of odd, bizarre moment where he gets shot, basically, because it's almost by chance.
Yeah, and also
Well,
it's quite strange, isn't it? Because he's alive. He dies sort of, I guess you could say, at the beginning, and then he's alive at the end. so so that's a
yeah,
very good example of a non-linear narrative
yeah, and then
situation.
Memento as well is quite a famous one.
Yes, this was another one I was going to bring up. Okay,
Yeah,
and explain. Actually, Memento is very good for doing that because, well, you explain why they use this method. What's wrong with the man involved?
Well, so basically,
Leonard,
it begins. Sorry, it
with the
begins
end.
with the end
Yeah.
where he's basically killing someone.
Mhm.
So what happens is it plays out a scene, and then it also kind of and then it would play back just before this scene to give you some more information about why he's killed the man. So you sort of discover that he's basically hunting for the murderer of his wife,
Yeah.
and he's got no long term memory. He's got like very short term memory, so he could be remembering something for 3 or 4 minutes, and then it just goes.
Yeah, because he's had head
So
concussion, hasn't he?
yeah,
So
he's had a big head injury,
yeah, so it's kind of
and
like
you can't. Yeah,
amnesia, but it's not amnesia because he can remember, but for only a very short space of time. So he
yeah.
has to
So
write
he
things
remembers up
down.
to a point, and his kind of memory before the accident is sort of fogged and clouded as well.
Yeah,
So he's tattooed certain very key points on his
body,
body about the identity of the person who killed his wife.
and he takes photos as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, he takes photos as well. He makes notes. But it's
Mementos.
just interesting how, yeah, mementos. Uh, it's interesting how the film plays out in reverse, and you see people manipulating him. And right back at the beginning, you get the twist. Then you get like a twist at the beginning.
Yeah, but you
But
don't know it's a twist, do you, until the
yeah,
end?
but it's very interesting to have
It
like
is.
go from the end to the beginning, and the beginning has the twist.
Yeah, because
So I just yeah
the thing is, we don't know what I mean, even though it begins at the very end and that's the twist, we don't know because it's just started off like that, don't we? So then
yeah
as you get towards the end of the film, it starts off from the beginning again, if you know
yeah.
what I mean.
So
So,
yeah, you've got the main
so
narrative structure is playing end to beginning, but at the same time,
yeah,
Nolan, because he's quite a complicated
it's very
character,
clever. Yeah.
he cuts in other sort of additional bits which are playing more chronologically.
Well, that's it. And I was going to bring
Yeah,
that up. So the black and white sequence bits, which
yeah.
is what's going on in present time, isn't it? The
It's
chronological
if I remember, yeah, they're sort of a bit more kind of
to it.
chronologically ordered.
Yeah, so
But
the color bits are kind of disorientated. They're
yeah,
kind of, and then the black and white bits are basically what's going on chronologically after all of that's happened in present time. But we don't know that because it's flicking back and forth, back and forth, back
yeah.
and forth.
So I
And
think what Nolan did once, there's a video on YouTube of
yeah,
him
I posted this. Do you
explaining.
remember?
Yeah, he's
He drew like a
explaining the timeline.
circle. Yeah, he did like a timeline,
Yeah,
didn't it? And
yeah.
do you want to
If
explain
yeah,
it? He kind of drew it like a
no, I can't
circle.
explain it.
Oh, I'll try and explain it and you can
Yeah,
help me along the way. So basically, it was his brother that wrote the short story and then
yeah,
he developed it into the film. And there's a video on YouTube, you can look it up, and he goes behind it and he tries to describe the timeline. So he drew the timeline as kind of like a hairpin or like a circle. So
yeah,
I guess you could say an oval. So let's say it's like an oval, like an eye
yeah.
shape. So it
So you
starts.
got like end to beginning or something,
That's
and
it. So
then
it starts off
paralleling
like
at the bottom is
that's it.
yeah,
So it starts off at the end, and then as you go along, right, this is where I get confused. All right, so the
I
beginning,
think it's more confusing him explaining it than actually watching the film.
I know. So the
'Cause I was
end,
never that confused until I saw him
it is really
explaining it.
difficult. So the end is at the beginning, and then
Yeah,
at the end, that's also the end. And then as you go along,
yeah.
you're kind of going, well, you're kind of
So
sort
he's
of
sort of
going,
going backwards
and then forwards.
chronologically, and then he's got paralleling. You've got scenes that are going forwards.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
It's very clever, but it's one of those things you have to watch a few times.
yeah. No, I think that's my favorite
It
Nolan
is
film. I
very, very
think. Yeah,
clever, but it's definitely not something. And also, it's one of those films where you need to revisit it a few times to actually get things. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean?
because he does lay out some visual clues as well.
Yeah.
So I don't want to sort of give away too much of the twist as well, in case
No.
there's 3 or 4 people who haven't seen the film yet.
And you do realize that he's, without trying to give away, that the main protagonist is actually very flawed, isn't he? He's kind of creating his own
Yeah,
sort of destiny, I guess. I don't, without trying to keep give it away. Do you know what
yeah,
I
and
mean?
like perspective in your narrative is quite an interesting technique as well, because you can have a very unreliable protagonist who can sort of, you're being manipulated from their perspective. And if
Yeah,
they've got like a very kind of, if they're not kind of in control of themselves in terms of, maybe their mentality or their psychology, or in his case, he's got the medical illness.
yeah.
You could be getting led kind of to think one way, but you're being led by someone who's
An unreliable resource. And also it's quite clever because you think that the whole time all these people are manipulating him.
yeah, yeah,
But actually he's, without trying to give it too much away, he's actually kind of doing it to himself as well, isn't he?
he is. Yeah, I mean, there's a moment where he makes a conscious choice to actually do that to himself. So sometimes he's manipulated not through kind of his own fault, but just as a kind of symptom of what he has.
And the
But then
coping
he also
mechanism.
he makes a conscious decision to basically fool himself and put himself onto this new path.
Yeah.
No, it's a really clever film.
Um, and also I guess to give him a sense of purpose, isn't it? Because he can't remember
Yeah,
within so many.
yeah.
So no, it is a really clever film. Can you think of any other films that don't follow uh like a non-linear narrative before we move on to the next thing?
I mean, a lot of avant-garde and art house films are quite famous for. Uh,
Um,
Sometimes they do it just for the sake of it, just sort of breaking rules. But time and narrative structure isn't kind of set by rules in sort of art house and avant-garde. So you could be cutting back and forth between lots of random times and scenes and things like that
yeah.
that don't necessarily make sense as a narrative structure.
And also I should point out the reason why they do it, why the filmmaker does it, because they want to try and get to convey a message across, don't they? So it's often like to cause confusion or to point out things like we said about Tarantino that you would have missed out on if it had been run in a normal linear structure. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
You wouldn't have known or been able to pick up on these things on why this happened, why that, because it's just following a boring like, and you're like, well, what's going on here? What's going on here? I don't understand. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah,
that's quite a, a good way. But avant-garde films are also, yeah, like that.
yeah.
I did
There's
think of,
also
sorry.
the Rashomon technique. So
Mm,
this is one made famous by an Akira Kurosawa film
mm-hmm,
called Rashomon. So
mm-hmm.
this is basically, it's been done a few times, but you're basically being told the same story from like several different perspectives.
Mm.
To do with perspective. So um, this can affect how the narrative comes across because you're being given a story by uh, different perspectives at each time, which can change the outcome or the way you might think of a story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is a bit like
So
Memento as well, really, isn't it?
yeah, kind of. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, Kurosawa was quite kind of one of quite famously
Mm.
where it's a very kind of basic story it told from different perspectives, and then each perspective kind of twists the story just a little bit more.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
obviously they did the same in a film that I sort of recommended to you but shouldn't have, uh, called The Handmaiden. That has the same
Yes.
kind of thing, yeah.
No, you're right, actually, you're right. Yeah, that
Basic
was
story.
quite confusing.
Yeah. So it's like 3 different the same kind of thing.
Yeah,
And then
because
you sort of yeah.
it was jumping all over the place, and then there's gaps in between, and then you realise that later on in the film, it goes back to those gaps that have been missed out on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like that, for instance. Um, are you there, Tom?
Yeah, I am, yeah.
Yeah,
So did you
sorry.
have another example?
Hang on a minute. I'm gonna stop. Okay.
Yeah, so do you have
Hello?
hello?
Oh, you cut off again. Hang on. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Do you have any examples?
Of the narrative. I
Yeah,
think we've
narrative. Yeah.
I think we've covered it pretty much, haven't we? We've just so basically we said that a narrative is usually that goes along in one long story plot line, so it goes from beginning to middle to end, which is the usual way a story is told in book form or film form. Say, but then there are cases where there's a non-linear narrative, which we were just talking about, and that's when it can jump around and cause complete confusion, or it's done for a reason of some sort. So it can begin from the end, and then it can go into the present, and then it can. There's all kinds of reasons why the plot might be mixed up in different time frames. So that's a non-linear narratives. I think we've pretty much covered that, to be honest. So,
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
yeah, should we move on to the next bit? So the next bit we were going to cover was a match cut. So quickly give an example of a match cut and what it means. So I described it very briefly at the beginning. It's just basically, what does it do? What's the meaning? So why
Yeah.
do
So this could
people
be
use match
sort of,
cuts?
yeah. So this could be transitioning between two scenes
That's it.
where you want to. So you could sort of transition where you want to make them kind of match, so you're transitioning seamlessly from scene to scene.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you an example of a film that does this quite well. Highlander.
Okay. To
So
be honest, I haven't seen it, but give us an
yeah.
example.
So I'll give you. There's several examples where basically there's one scene where this guy. So a lot. He's immortal, and but he remembers a lot from his past. So there's a lot of flashbacks. So you're cutting between time periods a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So what the filmmaker did, which was quite interesting, is he had lots of these different scene transitions. So there's one moment where he's focusing on the face of the protagonist, and it melds into coming from the past to the present, and it kind of comes onto this. So he's coming from the past to the present, set in New York, and it comes onto this image of like a graffitied image of Mona Lisa's face.
Mm-hmm.
So two faces kind of blend together, and then you're basically gone from the past back to the present.
Yeah.
And then there's another scene where the guy is looking in his fish tank, and then the camera kind of zooms in, and as it pans up the fish tank, you see the top of the fish tank water sort of swaying a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then as it continues panning up, you're suddenly out in this Scottish lake. And the way it's done is quite clever because from going into a fish tank and coming out into a Scottish lake, it's quite seamless.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
what it's supposed to do. I was going to ask you a quick question related to that. Did you ever see or study the film? So the Spanish title is Un perro de luz, but the French is Un chien de luz. Did you ever see that film? It was directed by Brunei and Dali. It's a very famous avant-garde.
Yeah, I've seen that a while ago. Yeah, it's quite it's a short film,
Experimental.
isn't it? It's very experimental with sort of
Yeah,
very
it was done in 1929, I believe. And at the time, it was very shocking because of some of the shots involved. And it's meant to be a very dreamlike film, isn't it? It doesn't make sense at all. There's no sense behind it, but really, it's meant to feel very surreal and bizarre. It's in strange dream form. And there's a very good example of a match cut, which is very disturbing actually, and that's what caused a lot of sort of upset at the time.
Yeah.
You know, there's that famous scene with the person whose eyes wide open and a razor's about to go across it to cut it open. Somewhere, I can't remember if it's in the middle or before it, I think it's in the middle, just after that, then it cuts to a cloud, doesn't it? Sort of running past the moon or something, and it's the same shape. So I don't know if you actually see the eye being sliced. I can't remember.
I think you do, but
You
I
do,
think what
don't
they've
you?
done is it's like a visual effects shot.
Yeah, it jumps sort of from the
yeah.
cloud, from the eye to the cloud, to the eye.
Because
So
I think they used a sheep eye or something like that.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah.
But that's another good example of a match cut, isn't it? because
I've got quite a good example of a match cut, which is
go on then.
quite crude. It's
We
from
did
a
a Space
Disney.
Odyssey one.
Uh, this is from me. Do you remember Me, Myself, and Irene?
Yeah, that was a long
Yeah.
time ago. I remember seeing.
So there's a shot where this dog is sort of perched over and it's about to do its business,
Yeah.
and it match cuts into this shot of someone pouring out like chocolate soft whip ice cream into a bowl. So it's the
I
sort of
don't
thing.
remember that.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing you'd expect from a sort of Farrelly Brothers film,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
quite
Sort of childlike
childish.
humor, isn't it?
Yeah,
Kind of that sort of and it's weird, like kids are like that, aren't they? They grow up and there's a kind of weird fascination with pooing and stuff like that and going to the toilet when especially with little boys and girls. I find it they kind of go through that phase and then obviously they grow out of it. So it's kind of that sense of humor. Can you think of any other
yeah,
examples of a match cut? We obviously covered the famous one in Space Odyssey where the apes throw um the stick into the end and that later turns into the spaceship. So that transitions between two different time frames. Time periods. But it doesn't have to be between two different time periods, does it? It can be locations as well, like you said with Highlander.
yeah.
So
I mean, it's if you want to kind of make something feel like continuous,
yeah,
rather than sort of having a quite you want to start something that's a little bit different or a new thread. You want to sort of have something that's continuous and sort of
yeah, and you
goes
don't want to have
into
to
the
start
next
all
thing.
over again by explaining
Yeah,
that storyline. You just kind of jump straight into it effortlessly by linking it up together with something you've just seen of a similar shape.
yeah. But I think there's been so many like very imaginative examples over the years. But I think
Yeah,
that Kubrick one is probably the most famous of them all.
yeah, yeah. No, I remember studying that one for that bit as well. Quickly, because you were talking about it, what did you think of the machine? Is it Hal?
Uh, Very creepy. Yeah,
Should we have
uh,
that voice installed on our computer
you could do. Yeah,
every time you turn the computer on?
yeah.
I
I'd be
do.
worried though. Every time it said something a bit creepy, I'd be worried that it's starting to become kind of self-aware.
Yeah, and plot against
Yeah,
you. You know what's really scary about that? I remember there's that very famous scene where I mean it's quite traumatizing. You don't want to go off to it, go off plot, but you know there's that scene where actually you begin to realize that Hal's actually becoming kind of human form and beginning to realize what's going on
yeah,
outside of him, like outside of it. He's not just a computer anymore, is he? And when he starts to realize that he can, you see a close up of their mouths talking, and he's
yeah.
reading their lips.
That's
That's
it. And then
scary.
that sort of triggers that very human sense of survival.
Yeah,
So yeah, suddenly he's like all about self-preservation.
yeah. It's really clever. I think he's a really good baddie, even though he's not in human form, and you never see him. He's just a voice. But yeah. I mean, that's an amazing film. Any other examples of a match cut before we go on to the next thing?
No, I think that's pretty
Yeah.
much well covered.
All right.
Yeah,
So let's go on to crossing the axis line. So you quickly described that, but quickly go for it again. What it quickly means.
yeah. So you've got the axis line is uh, so your actors will be one side.
Mhm.
So they'll be say left on the right of frame and the left of frame. Your two
Okay.
actors. So if you're from that this side of them, the near side or 90 degrees from them, you'll be seeing one person on the right at all times and the other person on the left at all times. So they're looking at each other.
Mhm.
So when you're cutting back and forth, you kind of know visually that he's looking at her, she's looking at him. But
Mhm.
if you were to cross the axis line, cross the other side of them, all of a sudden they've switched places. So
Mm.
if you keep doing that when you're cutting, it can be disorientating
Yeah. Yeah.
because it can look like he's looking at himself, she's looking at herself, or they're looking at something else entirely.
Yeah.
So it's the axis line is a way. It's kind of like a rule where if you're shooting subjects, you kind of spatially know,
where it's happening.
yeah, where you're editing as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you break that rule, it can become disorientating. But obviously, some filmmakers
Do it on
do
purpose. Yeah.
that on purpose. Yeah.
So let's give some examples of ones that follow the actual rule, and then we can go on to the more exciting bit where they deliberately break the rules. So
Yeah.
I can give one example, but you're going to have to help me explain it, because I remember briefly studying it in college when our lecturer was talking about the axis line, but I can't remember exactly how they organized the cameras. So there's that famous scene from the 1959 Ben-Hur movie where the chariots are racing, and it's in the amphitheater. So it's following them along. They're kind of doing a circuit, really, aren't they? So that's a good example. Do you know this one? Do you know how to explain it? I'm not sure if you.
I'm not too sure, but I'm thinking if they're going round and round, or
yeah. So where would have they placed the cameras to make it look? Because if they're going in a circle shape, for instance, you're going to need to make sure you follow them. The camera follows them going in that shape. You know what I mean?
Traveling, say, if you're setting up as a race and they're going right to left, say, you want to be filming in a way where they're always going to be coming, right to left, or because they're switching the sides. And
that's it, and that's where it gets confusing. So
it might get confusing.
Yeah, so it would start from the right. Am I right?
I can't remember exactly, but yeah.
I'm seeing a little tiny frame of it, like a thumbnail. So there's from what it shows, it start at the beginning race line. They're starting off from the right, and then they obviously finish up on the left as they get into the end line. But then there's obviously cameras placed along the set or amphitheater.
There's also logistical aspects to this as well, that if it's a big set piece like that, it might be that they've got 4 or 5 cameras to film the action. So they will all want to be on one whole side, the same side. And obviously when they're pointing ahead outwards across the amphitheater, you don't want to be. So that's why everyone.
Oh, sorry, Tom, can you say that again? Because you cut off.
Oh, so if you've got a line in the middle of the amphitheater and you're filming on the right side, all the cameras, 4 cameras, say, for example, laid out, if they're looking across, they're not going to catch any more cameras. But if you've got 2 cameras on the left side of the line, you're going to get cameras, catching each other. So that would be partly a logistical thing as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, from a visual point on screen and when you edit together, you want to have something that looks visually coherent.
Yeah, and that's where the editing, like you just said, that's also another reason why they have to follow that rule, because for the editing's sake, they know how to make it look like it's non-jarring, like you said, it's continuous.
I mean, if you were gonna switch your side, you could have a bridging shot. So a bridging shot or 2. So it could be maybe from just a rear shot or a perspective shot.
Yeah.
And then you could flip it, and it would be less jarring.
Yeah.
But generally, if you're filming that kind of thing, most people would still stay to the same side. Yeah.
Can you think of any other examples of where films or famous films use the typical rule of not crossing the axis line and following this simple rule of filmmaking? Hello?
I'm thinking if you watch football on the TV, as an example, everything would be filmed from one side of the stadium.
Yeah.
So, say Man United are always going, in the first half, they're going, to the left. So that. And then Man City are going to the right, and that. So, they would always do that sort of thing as well. They would have an axis line.
Yeah.
To make sure that the audience knows which way this team is shooting and which way the other team is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Should we get on to the more exciting bit?
Yeah.
Onto,
Okay.
I think this is a bit we really want to talk about, is films. Give examples of films that deliberately break this rule. So can you give any examples? What I remember studying one in college for avant-garde, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it is. It might ring a bell. Is it A Tokyo Story? It's a famous black and white Japanese film
Yeah.
with a
Yeah.
family, and there's a famous scene that it was just a scene we studied, and we'd never seen the film. The lecturer just showed us that clip where there was a mother comes in from one door to talk to her son, and
Mm.
then instead of going straight through the middle room to go through the other door, she kind of goes left. I can't remember. I'm trying to give you an example. And then as she
Yeah.
comes in left, she crosses in through the right. It's
Yeah.
just very, very distorted. And then do you know what I mean? It makes no
Yeah.
sense with the way she's coming into the house and entering, because the camera's not following her direction, as it's going all over the place. Basically, it's just
Yeah.
is
I
that A Tokyo
think
Story?
that would be, yeah. Yashiro Ozu. He was quite famous for this.
Okay.
So I don't know whether it was you know, intended as like something to disorientate. I think he was never too concerned with that kind of axis line.
No, I mean, I remember our teacher said the reason why he did that was to cause a kind of, because there's a kind the family's quite dysfunctional.
Yeah. So I
So
guess yeah, you can kind of do that. Yeah.
it was to convey that message, and as you go along in the story, you begin to realize
Yeah.
why that's happening, because there's it's not a typical family setting. It's quite, they're very dysfunctional. So it's deliberately breaking the rule. I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen that, but it just basically, you know, when you normally go into the room, you either go out of it, turn around and come back again, but she's kind of going all over the place. So for instance, I'm trying to give an example. So she's going through one room, and at the end of the room, she's opening another door. But then as she opens that door, you think she's going in a straight line, but all of a sudden she's coming in through the right side. And then she's
Yeah.
kind of leaving through another side. It's just all over the place. So it's meant to, I think, convey that. So can you give
Yeah.
any other examples of films that sort of do this on purpose? And you just said why with that Japanese filmmaker. He's very
Yeah.
famous, isn't he?
He was quite famous also, not so much just for that, but also he used to film a lot of his characters in kind of like a portrait,
Mm. Yes, I saw.
front on, uh, like Wes Anderson does basically. He's very famous for doing kind of portrait shots.
Mm.
So that almost takes the line away entirely, because if you're looking front on at someone, uh, the next cut is the other person talking front on, very direct. You're almost jumping between the line each time. So there's a new line, in between two characters, basically.
Yeah.
Uh, so he would cut between portrait shots of people, and then people are walking around, or if they're side onto each other in profile shots, he would cross the line again as well.
Yeah.
So he was quite famous about just putting the camera where he wanted, basically. Um, Ang Lee's done it a few times as well. He likes to cross the line.
Oh, can you give some examples?
Uh, I think he he must have done it in a few, because he does a lot of films with lots of kind of angst and you know repression and things like that, like The Ice Storm. I know he crossed the line a lot in, because he wanted to make
Oh,
it
can you
kind
say
of,
that again, Tom? So you cut off again.
yeah. So he crossed the line with the Incredible Hulk
Okay.
movie, Greek tragedy, and really want to get inside the kind of psychology of the main character, kind of being mentally unstable. So he would cross the line quite a few times
Okay.
in that. But
Um,
yeah, did you have any more examples?
no, I think we've pretty much sort of done it now, really, haven't we? So do you want to go on to, you wanted to cover colour, didn't you? So
Yeah, we can cover color theory.
yeah, so I didn't really do that. I guess that would mean what the filters on the colours. So like
So
film,
I mean, it could generally be anything really. So it could be the costumes, the set design, the
that's true.
lighting.
Um,
Um,
I'm thinking there's that famous shot in Schindler's List because it was all shot in black and white, and then there's that famous shot of the little girl in the red coat.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's
So I mean,
that's a
yeah,
good example, isn't it? Because it's a complete black and white film, and all of a sudden there's
yeah,
you see this red coat come out, the colours like so, and it stands out so visually because the rest of the film is all in black and white. So that's a good example. Can you think of any? I mean, can you think of examples before we go on to clothes and things like that? Can you
yeah.
think
I
of
mean,
any that are kind of shot in
yeah,
blue? I mean, I can give some examples. Like we covered, um, cat, like the Terminator and Blue Steel is kind of all in bluey, isn't it? And
yeah, yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of film like horror. So there's also this theory as well that has been through art and also through film, where certain colors don't go together on
mm.
screen, and you should never cross. It's like a rule, like the axis line, where you should never break the axis line. There's certain colors you should never put together. So it could be purple, green, red, green.
Oh,
But horror
really?
films, because it's sort of got this, they reckon it's got a kind of disorientating effect visually.
Yeah.
So horror directors will often use colors together, which shouldn't be put together,
Oh,
if that
okay. Can
makes
you give some
sense.
examples?
So Suspiria was quite famous for having very distinct colors throughout.
Yeah. I knew you were
So
going to bring that up because I was thinking, why is the
yeah,
spirit? So there's very bold colours, isn't it? Like
yeah,
the reds are so,
bold reds, yeah. So
yeah.
these were always individual meanings to each of the colors. Sometimes there is like red could mean danger, blue could evoke coldness and things like that in films.
Mm,
But with Dario Argento, he just wanted colors very striking on each frame
yeah.
that would make you kind of almost feel like a physical reaction. So,
Yeah.
red is one thing, but having really kind of bleeding, vibrant reds, it's quite kind of, it can be a little bit disorientating.
But at the same time,
Yeah,
because the colours are so visually stunning, it's actually quite beautiful as well, even though it's
it is. Yeah,
disturbing, isn't it?
yeah. And, sometimes he would mix colors. So you could have foreground might have red, and that comes into it, the sort of background of the set might be blue.
Hmm.
So, you can mix colors in your frame. Uh, Sometimes he would change color within the frame within a shot. So, a red background would suddenly filter out into becoming a white background
Okay.
by changing the light on a projected set behind the actress.
Yeah. And
Uh,
then, sorry.
yeah.
Um,
So, yeah, it's just very a striking way to use colors.
yeah, and I remember telling you, I saw somewhere that that was very, he based it very, very loosely, like the way he told the story, like visually, on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Because if you look at it very
Yeah,
clever, like she's in white, isn't she? She's like this
yeah,
very angelic colors, and so it's quite a sort of, it's a bit like an adult version of a disturbing fairy tale.
yeah,
Um, but I was going to bring up a quick thing because you said about the color red, that it's funny in Western culture, red is often the color of danger. But here's an interesting twist on it, and I'm wondering if you can help me give some examples. With Chinese culture, and your wife's Chinese and I'm half Chinese, red is considered lucky. Is-
yeah. Yeah,
So,
in other cultures, it can mean have romantic connotations
yeah.
as well.
So, or it can mean lust. It doesn't have to necessarily, but
Yeah,
especially for the Chinese, red is a symbol of prosperity and wealthness, and is a good lucky color. So I'm just trying to think
yeah.
if you can think of any Chinese films or um
I think In the Mood for Love had quite striking colors in that. So
oh really?
a lot of there was a lot of red in some of the set design.
Okay.
Uh, but I mean, the meaning for that for the director there might not necessarily have been about wealth and prosperity,
Yeah, yeah,
striking colours. So I mean, that one, you know, there's a lot of other colours throughout as well, like ambers and things like that.
yeah.
Uh, I
I
think there's
thought
a
of another
scene
good
where Maggie
example.
Cheung is wearing a striking red dress as well.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I thought of another example because we were talking about it ages ago, and it'll probably come up soon when I'm talking about it with my sisters for the Christmas episode. Home Alone. Everything in that film is red and green. Did you notice
Yes.
that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's a
they
good
did
one.
that
Yeah.
deliberately on purpose because they wanted it to make it look Christmassy and homely. So like everything is
Mm.
red or green in the house. So there's like red curtains
Yeah.
or green curtains. So that, but then that doesn't. That's also another good way of mise en scène because that's not the sign of in that situation the sign of danger, or do you know what I mean? It's the Christmas colours, what you normally see in a Christmas, so the Christmas tree or the presents,
Yeah.
etc. So,
But I
so
think sometimes filmmakers like to have bold colors and bold back set design and everything. It just it almost makes it more 3D as well, more three dimensional.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, can you think of any films that are shot in blue, any blues?
Yeah, blue kind of has this connotation with like coldness or even, iciness, steeliness.
Hmm.
So
Can you give
quite
some examples?
yeah, so Terminator 2,
Yeah, that's
a
very
lot
cool.
of that was shot in with a blue filter because it's got this almost metallic look, which kind of mixes together with the idea of, robots and cyborgs.
Yeah. Well, it's to give that kind of
Yeah.
cold feeling, isn't it? Because they don't have.
Yeah, cold and steely, metallic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's a good example of that. And a lot of that film is kind of, I was gonna say shot at nighttime, but then there are a few daytime scenes as well. But it's that kind of cold feeling. Is Alien shot in blue?
The first one
Got
wasn't
any?
so much. I think the second one
Yeah.
it had some blue, but mostly like greens.
There was
And I guess, green has a connotation with like
yeah.
alien
Yeah. And
feeling quite,
I'm trying to
yeah.
think of another. I remember seeing one in college with Jamie Lee Curtis, and I can't remember what it was called, but is it Blue? No, it
Could
wasn't
be
Blue.
blue steel.
Yeah, what I'm thinking is Blue
Yeah.
Steel, and there's like a madman in there that keeps stalking her,
Yeah.
and she's like a police cop. I
Yeah.
remember that being in blue, or am I wrong?
There was some blue in that. Yeah. So again,
Yeah.
that's to, so you will get horror films that kind of have that as well. Suspiria had, several sequences in blue as well. I mean,
Mm.
that one covered every color. So
So, so you
yeah.
said what does blue usually? What are they trying to say by putting a blue filter on it? Is to try and give that feeling of what?
Yeah, I mean, most of the times it's to give a sense of like distance or coldness.
Hmm.
Uh, it can mean different things, really. Again, uh, and then obviously you've got. Do you remember Hero with Jet Li and Maggie Cheung and everyone?
Oh, your you love Maggie Chung, don't you?
No, I do love
My
Maggie.
auntie.
Your aunt Maggie, yeah. You still haven't forwarded me her address, have you? So
Will you still tell me
yeah,
Keanu's? I'm still waiting.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll get onto it.
Okay, good. Yeah,
So you
yeah.
were
So
saying, oh
yeah,
yeah, Hero. Yeah.
yeah.
Who was that directed by? Was it Ang Lee?
No, Yang Jimu.
Okay.
So yes, he also did House of the Flying Daggers and a few other things
Oh,
as
and
well.
those colours are absolutely stunning,
Yeah.
aren't they?
So there's always a theme with each scene, and there's different scenes have flashbacks. Again, uh, there's almost like a break of the narrative structure.
Mm.
So like you're seeing a lot of things from different perspectives and in the past. So there's scenes where everyone is dressed in red, the sets are red, the lighting's red. Other scenes where it's blue, other scenes where it's white, other scenes where it's green.
Yeah.
Uh, and they all have different kind of emotional effects on the audience, represent different things.
Can you imagine how long that must have taken to set up
Mm.
those shots? For those films, especially
You
when they're
can,
so
yeah,
visually striking. Um,
and you can tell how much time goes into them, and it just,
yeah.
yeah.
Well,
I
they
mean, those
deliberately
films are
want those
gorgeous.
colours to come across. I mean, those colours are like I didn't see Hero, but I remember watching House of Flying Daggers, and the
Yeah,
colours are just absolutely amazing, especially when the two of them are in the forest with the bamboo trees.
yeah. I mean, there's a scene similar to that in Hero as well.
Mm.
So obviously, where you because you're in bamboo and you're in that kind of natural setting, they're amplifying the greens in that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it must have taken a hell of a long time to set all those to set all those shots. Are there any other examples or films where you can think of where they use
So I
different color
guess
filters?
maybe not so much color, but a kind of a variation on that is films in black and white. So you could look at
Okay.
noir films, with the high contrast black and white, so lots of shadows. Uh, so you're really emphasizing your blacks and your whites in in your noir films.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? The noir films. My stepdad, he's really into them, and I remember one Christmas buying him a box set of black and white noir films because he like those famous ones like is it the Maltese Falcon and all those.
Yeah, and the Third Man and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, did you ever see
Yeah.
any of them? I mean, I've got to admit, I never got into them, to be honest. But
I have done, yeah. So, like the Third Man, for example, is one that's dated really well
okay.
because the way it was shot was so ahead of its time. So there's lots of kind of askew angles to kind of really unsettle you throughout because
Hmm.
there's a lot of espionage where this guy is coming to find out who killed an old friend of his.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's set in, I think it's Vienna, so lots of cobbled streets, dark alleys, and it was like really ahead of its time and quite stylish.
Yeah.
So there's lots of people lurking in shadows. There's lots of these kind of vast, wide shots of the settings, slightly tilting the camera to kind of disorientate you as well.
Yeah, and
So yeah, it's
why
really stylish.
and there's that those very famous shots of them kind of talking to themselves or they're kind of just talking to the camera, aren't they? We
In some of the really classic noir films they did, yeah,
Yeah, I
but they
mean it's
don't.
not so much talking to
Yeah,
the camera, but you hear their voice like a narrative, a bit like I
yeah,
guess
or a
Taxi Driver is
voiceover
a good
sometimes. Yeah,
example of that, isn't it?
yeah,
Because there's a lot of sort of he's talking in is it the first person? Like
yeah.
so I don't know why was that such a big thing back then, do you think? Because that's
I
very
think,
well known of film noir, that kind of style
yeah.
where you have a voice on top going, "Oh, it was a cold, dark night," or something, uh,
I think sometimes because they wanted to set and they wanted to kind of that was almost part of the atmosphere building
yeah,
because it was meant to be a more visual form of storytelling again.
okay.
After everyone got the talkies basically when sound came in, everyone was making big dialogue heavy romance pictures and things like that. So
Yeah.
film noir was about getting back to becoming more of a visual medium again.
Oh,
But
I
at the
see,
same
okay.
time, they still wanted to. They always were focused on characters with intense internal thoughts as well.
Yeah,
Back then, they decided that maybe a voiceover and a narrative would be better, so you could say what the character is feeling.
yeah. Do you know
That
what
became a
it's
little bit
funny?
outdated when directors wanted to leave it more to the audience to
Yeah.
figure.
Do you know what's funny is that it kind of makes you think that, like, it goes from one extreme to the next. Like, it's gone from the silent films all of a sudden to them discovering sound, and all of a sudden, bang, lots of sound, lots of talking, lots of talking.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it reminds me of that famous scene in, in Singing in the Rain.
Oh, which scene is that?
Singing in the Rain. Oh, my mum loves that musical.
Yeah,
Well, because it starts off with all the talkies, isn't it? And all of a
yeah,
sudden they're introduced to sound, and they're like at a sort of film party, and they're like, oh, this guy's coming, and just listen to this, and he goes, hello, this is a talking picture. Notice my lips are moving in synchrony, and I am a talking picture. And then all of a sudden, all these talking musical films come out, and they're like, oh no, we're going to have to switch up, because they've started filming something in silent
Yeah.
silence, because it's like, a silent film, and then all of a sudden these talking films sort of come out of nowhere because sound's been invented, so they have to develop dialogue in a storyline to go with it, because they can no longer have subtitles underneath. So it kind of reminds me of that. I guess it was like jumping from one extreme to the next, really, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah,
Did you ever get into the film noir films? I never did.
a little bit. I'm more into neo-noir, which was kind of like from the sort of 60s, 70s onwards, where they would take all the kind of aesthetics of noir and modernized it slightly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so something like is neo-noir. So it's set back in the same times as all the classic noirs.
Oh, sorry.
Similar story.
What film is this, Tom?
Uh,
So you cut off.
Chinatown.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is that
So
Roman Polanski?
yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Yeah. But yeah, so and then more modern ones would be something like Drive with
Okay.
Ryan Gosling. That's a
Yeah.
neo-noir. So I'm more into those than the sort of classic period.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does the film noir, would that have to deliberately be in black and white to call it a film noir, or is it a film noir just because it's the
Well, I think from the classic period, it's sort of mostly in the 1940s
right?
towards like the early 50s. So
Okay.
obviously they had to be in color anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
But then
but
you
it
get
would,
sorry.
yeah, they would have narrative, certain narratives that would be common amongst noirs. So there would always be like femme fatales and things like that.
Yeah.
But the aesthetics as well. So
Um.
lots of shadows and high
Yes.
contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For instance, the film Taxi Driver, because I
Yeah.
remember seeing a video about Tarantino, because he's obviously a real film nerd as well. So he does these like film essays and stuff, and he does a breakdown of Taxi Driver. And at one point, I think he describes it as being a kind of a film one, because the characters talking in the first person. There's a lot of
Yeah.
monologues based, and it's quite an insular film, isn't it? Because you see people along the way, but he's quite a lonely person, and he's just like a sociopath.
Yeah.
Is it
I think,
sociopath?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Probably a sort of bordering on psychopath as well.
yeah. He's not quite right in the head, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But then, can you call that a film noir, or is it just taking elements of film noir?
So you would probably call it a neo-noir. So
Okay.
anything kind of after a certain period that has the noir aesthetics or cer- some things from the noir. So sometimes you can take certain elements. It might just be the visuals or the sort of narrative kind of ideas, but it might be that you could be called a neo noir. So there's
Okay.
certainly that just means a new noir basically.
Okay. So can you give some
Yeah.
examples of that? So you said Drive, and obviously there's Taxi.
Yeah, so most of Michael Mann's earlier films, so Thief, Manhunter, and Heat as well.
Hmm.
Uh, and of these often also deal with crime and punishment and things like that as well. So
Okay.
there's often always like a crime element as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
So that's usually, and it's funny, isn't it, how sort of genres kind of split up, and this is kind of another way of emphasizing mise en scène. I mean, it goes on and on and on, but we covered like codes of conventions, remember, in college. So you can mix up what do you call it? So you have one genre and you can mix it with another genre. So for instance, you could have a comedy and a horror, and then that would be like a dark comedy, for instance, or you could have a romance and then a comedy, and that becomes a rom-com. So So you can also, or then you can get like science fiction horrors, like sci-fi horrors. So they all kind of, you can mix and match them and take bits of that genre and bits of that genre and sort of stick it all together to make something else, can't you?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I
So
think that's become a little bit more normalized over the last 30 years, especially.
yeah,
I mean, especially now, everything seems to be genre blending, uh, what happens to be popular.
yeah. But I will say, do you think that might be because over the generations we've become more open-minded and multicultural, for instance? Do you know what I mean? We're
Yeah, there's definitely elements of that as well. I think,
yeah,
there's a lot of, like martial arts cinema from, China has kind of been infused into American films now.
mm,
So, lots of these films in America, after The Matrix came out, basically every film in America, action film, everyone was doing martial arts and being pulled up on wires.
yeah,
So, yeah. And obviously, The Matrix got everything from, Chinese cinema, Hong Kong cinema.
yeah. So that's it. Is there anything else you want to cover on Mise En Scene, or there's other things we need to do, like um I guess would camera shots also count as mise en scène,
Yeah.
wouldn't
I
they?
mean,
So explain the different camera shots that usually is involved in making a film, the
so
various
it's kind of like you've got different camera shots. So you'd have wide shots, which could be, you could have very wide shots. But in terms of capturing characters, where you see the whole of them, you could have a mid shot where you'd be sort of, midriff up, and then mid
is it,
close,
so is
and
the
then
mid one head to shoulders? I can't remember.
yeah. So mid might be, just below, just
To the waist.
sort of, yeah, waist up. Then the
Okay,
mid close might be shoulders up.
okay,
Close up might be, sort of, well, close up would probably be shoulders up, and then
okay.
you'd have extreme close up, which might be, a very distinct part of the face, like maybe the eyes to focus on.
Yeah. So for
Yeah.
instance, if they're trying to emphasize on a very intense scene with a character and their emotions, what
Mm.
shot would they usually go for?
So, I mean, you might decide that if it's quite intense, you might want to get in closer,
Mm,
particularly if it's focused on one character.
yeah,
But again, there's other aspects that might affect your shot as well. So, the distance of the camera to the person. So you might be on a close up, but also very tight with the camera,
mm,
which can give this almost like disorientating effect,
yeah,
very kind of intrusive. Or you might be shooting from afar and zoom in, so like a long lens shot where it looks more normal, but then it's closer.
yeah.
So that's not quite as intrusive.
No.
Uh, yeah. So also you've also got things like in the frame with blocking,
Mhm.
so placement of actors on the set. So if you've got two actors on the same scene on the same shot, it might be that someone's hanging back slightly, someone's in the foreground, and they're looking more toward the camera.
Yeah,
So they're not facing the other actor. So that can sort of be, maybe they're trying to say something, but they're hiding something at the same time.
yeah.
So there's, yeah, just lots of different ways that you can
Emphasize.
set up your frame and your actors and the meaning of the shots.
Yeah. I thought of a good example, but I can't remember the name of this, and I've put it on the film lovers a few times. When I've asked people to think of examples of like a long shot. What's a long shot? Where it basically, instead of doing different shots along a long sort of journey, like walking along a long tunnel, for instance, it's just done in one big go. Does that make sense? So
That,
that
yeah, that'd be a long take,
is, oh, a long
or
take or a long
you
shot.
might call it, yeah, you might call it a oneer as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I'm trying to
Mm.
think of examples. So there's that. I mean, I know it's a TV show. I never watched it. The West Wing was very famous for doing that, weren't they?
Oh yeah, lots of these, yeah, long corridor shots.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that,
yeah, things like that. And I'm trying to think. Can you think of any film examples? I can think of the famous one in Magnolia. There's a famous one. Um,
yeah, yeah, Paul Thomas Anderson likes using them. So do
yeah,
you remember Boogie Nights?
yeah, I do.
So there's a whole shot where obviously you've got the opening shot where you establish Dirk Diggler going through this nightclub, and it's all
Mhm.
in one shot, and it's going round him. Then it pans around Roller Girl, who's doing like rounds on a roller skates. Uh, so there's a lot of long takes there, but there's one really famous shot a bit later on at a party where the camera's following him around and it starts breaking off to other people. And there's
Okay.
a moment where the camera basically goes down into a pool, submerges under the pool, then comes up the other side
Uh-huh.
without breaking the cut. So yeah, that's quite a famous one as well.
Um, I was trying to think, what is it? I'm trying to think. So I mean, can you think about when you think about it, if they could actually just break it down, couldn't they? And then but then if they do a long take, then they'd really, really have to pay a lot of attention in organizing what cameras are when and when to cue them all in one big go. Do you know what I mean? It's a big, it's like rehearsing
Yeah,
it all in one big go. It's kind of like doing a live show, really, isn't it? Because
a little
you're
bit.
doing
Yeah, it
a
is. Yeah,
live stage show, you'd have to make sure the lights are on cue on the right time, and you need to make sure that this camera's there to make sure it's shooting that bit, and then the next one is there to. Oh, is it just one camera following them along the whole way?
it would normally be one camera, but occasionally what they'll do. So like 1917. So the
No.
whole film, that war film is one shot basically through the
Oh,
whole thing.
really? Okay.
But obviously they've got hidden cuts.
Okay.
So it's made to look like one shot, but it's hidden cuts.
Okay.
Uh, so that kind of it's meant to be kind of immersive, so that you're not being distracted by cuts everywhere.
Okay.
Which is why a lot of people choose to do long takes. Sometimes they do it just to show off, I think.
Do you think?
Sometimes it's a little bit. It feels like there's no dramatic meaning to do it.
Mm.
So you'll get this a lot in action films, say, where it's just there to show off.
So generally speaking, in a long take, it would just mean there's one camera involved in following the the
Yeah, for most
character.
of the time, yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's a long take can just mean something like 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. So
You know,
it won't necessarily be more than one camera. It would just be one following them along the way, basically.
yeah,
Yeah.
unless they're like 1917, where it's going to be the whole movie basically, when they
Okay.
would have to have more cameras that they would cut between.
So if it was one camera following them, the character around, and it's like a long take, for instance, I guess
Yeah,
they'd have to practice a lot with the actor first, rehearse
yeah, you'd
their
have to.
moves
Yeah,
exactly, then, wouldn't they?
because also you've got the aspect of blocking, which basically means where everyone is on the frame.
Right.
So if you're following the characters around, say down a corridor into a room to
Mm.
have a dialogue scene with someone, then you also want once your dialogue is happening properly.
Yeah.
So everyone needs to be on their markers in the right position, because you also you've got lighting to consider as well.
Yeah. Sure.
So yeah, so it can be difficult. Sometimes people will do long takes, and they'll opt to do that in a more gritty kind of film
Mhm.
where everything's meant to be a bit more documentary like.
Okay.
So where lighting and stuff isn't quite as important. If someone looks a bit faded,
Yeah.
it's maybe it's natural just where they're standing, or they're using natural light.
Um. Let's go on to lighting since we're talking about lighting. So, can you think of any films that used? Oh, is that Lulu?
That is Lulu. She wants me to pull a cracker.
Oh, go on then. Go pull
Shall
a
I,
crack
shall I
over.
pull a cracker? Right, you hold the other side. There we go. Right, you're going to pull.
Hi,
Oh, oh, very good. There we go.
Lulu.
Excellent. Right, go. You can take that down now.
Hello.
Put
I
your
said
hat on.
hello. Say hello to Auntie
Okay.
Sonia.
She's run off now. Yeah. I have no idea where she got a Christmas cracker from.
Don't worry. That's so cute. Bless her. So yeah, let's talk about lighting. So I don't know. Take lighting away. Describe lighting. So examples of how lighting can help in a situation, or set up a feeling.
Yeah, so this is basically how you can manipulate the viewer's eye
Okay.
into seeing what you want. So, with your mise en scène, you can very cleverly move your audience's eye. It could be that you're moving it to a particular character over someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So we discussed Buscemi Buscemi the other day, didn't we? So Ghost World is a film where there's one sequence where there's a two shot with Buscemi Buscemi and Dora Birch standing side by side.
In Ghost
But
World.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a very distinct difference. Like he's wearing drab clothes, drab colours
Mm-hmm.
in a drab set, and she's wearing quite bright blue.
Okay.
But also, there's just a very slight spotlight on her as well. So it's meant to kind of represent that she's kind of bringing this light into his life.
Okay.
And then this is more of an emotional moment for her in the scene as well.
So it's very
Uh,
subtle.
yeah, very subtle. So that again, it's partly your set and your costumes, but also very subtle use of lighting as well,
Mm.
just to get the faintest spotlight on her.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, with horror, and
Oh, hello?
yeah, and
I'll say you cut off.
also
I was going to
yeah,
bring up horror films. So why
yeah.
traditionally, because you just brought it up, so I was going to bring that up. So why do traditionally horror films tend to be shot in dark or very
Well, this is
to create an atmosphere, I guess?
it creates atmosphere. It gives you places to hide your villains. So Mike Myers, say from Halloween, was quite famous for uh, being hidden in shadows. So you'd maybe light one half of your frame,
Mm.
and then the other half, or towards the back of the frame, would be quite black and dark.
Yeah.
So your protagonist walks into the lighter half, and your eye is being drawn away from this like dark shadow.
Yes.
Although you tend to, in horror, your thoughts are subverted. So maybe you start thinking of the dark shadow. You start getting drawn to that. You think,
Yeah.
why can't I see anything there?
Mm.
And obviously that's where Mike Myers is going to burst out from.
Yeah. So the
Yeah,
audience is kind of basically made to feel like they're in the dark as well, don't they?
yeah, exactly. So you start getting drawn maybe to what's in the dark corner,
Yeah.
or what can't you quite see in the dark.
Did you ever see that film Black Christmas?
I haven't seen that.
Don't
No, I need
watch
to
the
see that.
remake. Watch the original one.
Oh yeah, I'd always watch the original. Don't worry.
Yeah, no, the original one, when it became like a cult classic. And actually, I remember getting into an argument about this film with my friend, who's a younger filmmaker in his 20s, and we got into a bit of a heated discussion about, because he was like, "No, I prefer the second one. The second one is much better than the remake." And I was like, "No, it's gonna be crap." I said it's like the first one's much better.
Yeah,
The first one basically it panned really badly when it came out in the cinema. And it was roughly about the same time Halloween came out. And the
yeah,
reason why it bombed so badly was because in Halloween you see the boogeyman. In Black Christmas you never see him. But you're kind of, without giving it away, you're kind of basically, because it's a lot of sort of POV type shots and you never
yeah,
see him, you're basically the boogeyman yourself. Does that make sense? So it's
yeah.
very clever.
It sounds quite ahead of its time.
Yeah, it was. And it
Yeah,
kind of, even though it did really badly when it came out, over a long period of time, it became like a cult classic, which a lot of these films tend to do over a long period of time with film nerds and things like
yeah,
that. But that's quite clever because you think Christmas is such a lovely time of year. There's lots of lights and things, and it does that, and it's just basically flipping the situation over and making such a lovely time of year of Christmas lights incredibly dark and horrific, and which is quite original, I think. So that's another good way where horror can use light and mix it up, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think. So I mean, in the classic era of Hollywood, where everyone almost followed a studio formula, like the production code,
Yeah,
where everyone had to do kind of like the same thing. There were certain expectations with how you'd light things and shoot things. So you had the very distinct like 3 point lighting. So the light above, the light to the side, and the light in front.
mm,
Sometimes a rear light as well. So you'll see a lot of old black and white films where it's just this sort of melding of grey, where everyone looks very kind of uh, brightly lit. Everyone kind of looks, almost two tone.
yeah,
Perfect lighting, no shadows. Everyone is very soft lighting as well, so
mm,
everyone looks quite angelic, especially the women.
yeah,
So this was where Noir State branched out and did things differently by introducing shadows. So
yeah.
all they did really was take away one or two of the lights that would normally be used to create harsh shadows.
And there's those very, very famous photos of the old female movie stars like Betty Davis,
Yeah,
and
I
there's
mean they
this
all, yeah,
very harsh um black and white photos where the light's very like harsh on their faces. Like I love
yeah,
that kind of because as I do a bit of modeling as well. So I always love that kind of genre, that always kind of that lighting. That's always my favorite. The very, yeah, like the film noir black and white type striking photos where the light's very harsh and there's shadows in the
yeah, and you got a
background.
bit of shadow, and you got some different tonal kind of things. It's very sort of bright, soft lighting.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's only two colors. It's like grey and white basically. Very two shades, whereas noir brought in more shades, and
Yeah.
it just gave something a bit more of like a three-dimensional sense. I think when
And
you
I
start
thought,
throwing in shadows, it
yeah,
feels
and I
more
thought of
3D.
just as he's talking about that, I thought about a good example of how that's kind of been brought in the present. There's that very famous Madonna video, Vogue. That's very
Yeah.
much like, and who was that directed by, Tom?
Oh, I don't know this. You'll have to tell. I
It's David
probably do.
Fincher.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he
yeah,
directed a few of her films. So he
yeah,
directed um Vogue. He directed Express Yourself, and he did that Bad Girl. So he
yeah,
did quite a few before he became a film director. Um, and I should note, because I remember talking to a film, I think it was Brad I was talking to a while ago, Brad Watson, a filmmaker, and he was saying that a lot of, when they come out and eventually their careers develop, a lot of film directors, when they first start off, are sort of more into advertising. They work more in advertising, and some work
yeah.
more.
Advertising and music videos and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
corporate.
So
Yeah,
the older generations, like Ridley Scott, for instance, they started off in advertising, and then
yeah,
once like the more kind of recent ones, they sort of started off in music videos, like Fincher, etc. And Brad said that he started off doing music videos. That was kind of his way in as well, really, to build up his portfolio. So yeah, David Fincher very much used that kind of sort of film noir look, and you can see it when you look at the Vogue music video with the lights and the harsh blacks and whites and the shadows and the colors brought out in that. So yeah, it's kind of transitioned very well. Um, and we we're talking about horror films. Can you think of any classic horror films that are typically not shot in dark and make it even more striking because they're shot in daylight? I can think of one example, but I'm wondering if you know it.
uh, there's been a few examples, I guess, hasn't there? Yeah. I know the recent film Midsummer, which I haven't seen. That's another one that's shot a lot in light.
Oh, okay, I don't know that
Uh,
one.
yeah. So, and obviously the beginning of A Quiet Place as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes.
So, what's your example? I probably
Oh
do
well,
know.
I was going to say the Texas Chainsaw Massacre,
Oh yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
original one.
Definitely, yeah,
But I mean, I haven't seen it because I'm too much of a wimp. But I know of it, and I know that was very much kind of against its
yeah.
very
I mean,
much.
sometimes it's about finding a way to be effective in how you want to shoot the film because obviously they would have been restricted by having no money and having, not really having a lot of lights. So I mean, there's one or two scenes at night, but then most of it is in the day, and
Yeah,
that
but then
tends to
if you
be the
think about it,
scariest
it
part.
works really well because daylight is traditionally, when it's associated with film, is meant to set the kind of the ambience or the feeling that everything's safe. Like if you saw like a comedy, you would never see anything in pitch black like that, would you? Because it's
No,
meant to be comforting, or like a rom-com, for instance.
yeah,
So so generally speaking, when a horror film's shot, it's meant to make you feel uncomfortable and feel unsafe, and like I don't know what's going to happen because it's in the dark and I'm in the dark. But to put a horrible situation in a light, do you know what I mean? That's unusual because light's usually associated with being a comfort type thing. Like you can see everything, do you know what I mean? And you're not
yeah.
meant to
There's
feel.
nowhere really to hide.
Yeah. Whereas
Yeah,
when it's in the dark, you kind of. Oh, there's Lulu again. Hi,
yeah.
Lulu.
That was for me. That's my Christmas present from work. Yeah,
Have I got a present?
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Ask Lulu if I got a present.
Yeah. Is there a present in there for Auntie Sonia? What's that? Okay.
What's my present?
Yeah. Well,
Ask Lulu what her favourite film is quickly.
oh, I don't know what her favorite. I think her favorite film would be Spirited Away.
Oh, I don't know that film.
Yeah, or Labyrinth maybe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Don't put Never Ending Story back on. You traumatise
Oh,
her.
she does. She does like that one though. Yeah. Yeah.
She'll end up in therapy forever.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Do I know what? Yeah. Okay. Okay. I will have a look later. Yeah.
Look at this one then.
Okay. She's just pulled out a Terry's chocolate orange.
So
From
we've been hijacked by how old is she now? 4.
5 now. Yeah.
We've been hijacked by a 5-year-old.
5,
This is Lulu, Tom's.
yeah. Lulu, what's your favourite film? What film do you like?
All of them.
All of them. That's a good answer.
Does she like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Not yet, but I think she might do soon enough.
Yeah, definitely don't show her that, Phil.
No,
So we were saying, unless she comes back, we can hear in the background. We were saying that so that's a good example of a horror film being shot in a different situation because it's in daylight. So can you think of any other examples apart from that? Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
No, I can't really think of that many more.
I thought of an example of lighting.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Did you ever see that film with Gary Oldman, Dracula?
Yeah.
The
That's a
Francis
good.
Ford Coppola.
Yeah, I love
Is
that film.
that a horror film, or
It
is
kind
that
of
like
it has.
gothic? Because that's kind of very dark, like shots.
Yeah, it's got a few different elements to it, but yeah, it's very theatrical. I think so. Everything's a
Yeah,
little bit over the top.
and a very
So
bad
even the
Keanu
lighting.
accent, even though I love him.
Yeah. Well, you can forgive him, can't you?
Yeah, of course I can. So yeah, so that's a good example. Any other good examples of lighting? And then I think we should wrap it up unless you think of anything else we can cover with something. I think we've pretty much covered it.
No, I think we've covered that.
Yeah, anything else you want to bring up? We've covered colours. Let's give some quick example of costumes. What are your favourite films with costumes?
I think there's films where that they date well, where costumes, because they're so big part of the film, they're not necessarily fashion centered. they work well. So this could be period dramas
Mm.
where there's always a context to it. And also, I like things that look, stylish. So there's this film called The Samurai,
Mhm.
which is a French kind of like hitman film.
Mhm.
And he's always got this long kind of trench coat and a sort of trilby hat. So it's kind of very French, but mixed with old kind of American gangster style. So
Yeah.
it's going to look cool forever, I think.
Um.
Whereas if you look back at the Matrix, does it look a little bit naff? Some of the costumes and
Well, yeah, I was going to bring that up
design?
because as soon as you said trench coat, would
Yeah,
the Matrix come out after the film you just talked about or
yeah.
before?
So the film I talk about is the '60s.
Oh, right, so it came out
Yeah,
before.
of '60s films and things like that. Maybe they've dated better in some respects
Yeah.
than like late '80s, late '90s emo fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I just thought because you talked because there's trench coats, there's a lot of trench coats.
yeah.
There's that and you love her as well. And Chunkin Express, the lady who's in the wig and the raincoat. You love her. What's her name?
Oh,
Hey,
who's what?
Chunkin Express. We were talking about this. You
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Bridget Lynn, or was it?
That's Bridget Lin, isn't it? Yeah, I'm more of a Faye Wong fan myself,
Oh,
though.
you're Faye Wong.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course you are. I thought you were Bridget. But
Well,
no,
I'd
me and
say like,
my mum and sisters, we really like that look.
yeah,
The
I
wig
think
and
yeah,
the
that looks
French
cool. Yeah,
raincoat
yeah,
and the heels. um, but yeah, I guess the best like examples of costumes would be like, well, one of them was Dracula. That was very specific, wasn't it? Because
yeah. There's a
um,
very distinct kind of Dracula style that everyone seems to follow.
yeah. Oh, I thought of another one. And I actually really love this film, even though it's not a very well liked film with most people. I think you'd like it too. Blah, 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 The Fifth Element.
Oh yeah, that's so
That was Jean-Paul
sci-fi.
Gaultier.
Yeah, yeah, Sean Paul. So I think he's done quite a few film costume designs as well.
Oh, has he? Like what?
But I think he might have done for Nikita, the Luc Besson film.
Oh, yeah, because he
He
worked
might,
quite a lot with
yeah,
Luc Besson, didn't he?
which is obviously that's more, it's more of a grounded kind of thing. But the costumes in that were quite stylish as well.
Yeah,
Obviously, a bit more refrained because he's not in a sci-fi world where he can go a bit mad.
yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, in sci-fi, costumes are quite important to make the film stand out.
yeah. And I think with The Fifth Element, for instance, like what was her name? Mila Jovovich
Mila
character.
Jovovich, yeah.
No, but the character's name?
Lilu, Lilu,
Milu.
Lilu, I think.
Oh, Lilu, not Milou. Milou is the French name for Snowy in Tintin in Snowy.
Oh yeah, excellent, yeah,
It's the same. Yeah, sorry, so I was thinking of that for some reason. Yeah, like she has the bright orange costume and the yellow crop top on. But they're all
yeah,
very sort of bright, colourful clothes, aren't they? Because it's set in a futuristic, so it's very exaggerated. And
yeah, very. And then you've got
Gary
Chris
Oldman's costume.
Tucker. He's got
Yeah,
this kind of weird variation on like some kind of futuristic prince.
yeah.
Yeah,
He annoyed me in that film.
he's really annoying, isn't he?
He is a little bit. But yeah, like and Gary Oldman's costume's very unusual. I mean, that's very futuristic with the cape and
Yeah.
the funny hairstyle and
Mm. And then
um
Bruce Willis just looks like Bruce Willis.
but he's just in a vest.
Dirty vest. So it's like, yeah, Bruce, dirty vest again.
Yeah, just put a vest
Yeah.
on him, that's fine. He looks good in a vest. Can you think of any other films where the costumes really stand out for you, or films that you really like the costumes for?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference where if you look at sci-fi, for example, where some films date well because of their costumes and their everything else. Some films date quite badly. So before Star Wars kind of revolutionized everything, uh, a lot of the sci-fi films that were coming out were things like Logan's Run.
Hmm.
So this is quite famous for having everyone running around in these sort of silvery jumpsuits,
Okay.
and it looks a little bit kind of naff by today's standards.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously everyone sort of looks at Star Wars and the stormtroopers, and they've got such a distinct look that it still looks quite impressive.
But it still looks very contemporary, I think.
Yeah, because I mean they, in all the like countless Star Wars sequels and TV spin-offs that they're doing now, that you still see the stormtroopers coming
Yeah.
back,
I mean,
and
that's
Darth
got to
Vader
be.
obviously as well, such a
No,
striking villain.
well, yeah, and also it was the 80s when it came out, wasn't it? So,
Yeah, so the first one was late 70s, and then the 80s they had two more.
yeah.
And then, Blade Runner was very kind of, they had dark costumes as well, lots of, you know, things that were inspired by old fashioned kind of things. Like Harrison Ford wears long trench coats and looks like he's from a 30s gangster film.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a timeless look. And then you got Rutger Hauer has this kind of long black trench coat and, very kind of, what's it? Platinum blonde hair, spiky hair.
Yeah.
So he looks quite striking. So these things are all quite memorable and
Um,
quite timeless.
just a quick question. You might not be able to answer it, but like in regards to the people, like the costume people, for instance, who are in charge of the costumes or making them, do you think they would have they've started off as working in fashion, or would they've had more training in, say, the art department side? And would they've had to do a lot of research specifically if it was set for a time period
I mean, it can be a bit of a
of
mixture of
everything?
both,
Yeah.
really. Yeah. I mean,
And
some
some, I guess, maybe
people.
some have
Yeah.
worked in the theatre as well, I guess, couldn't they?
Yeah. So there's certain companies that specialize in, say, period costumes,
Mm.
and because there's not that many of them, people with that kind of interest and companies that do that, you know, they almost get kind of all the work basically. So in the UK, maybe there's half a dozen companies that deal with, all the films that film in the UK,
Yeah.
and they get a lot of repeat work because they're so specialized in what they do.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And if it's a
but
period
yeah,
piece, they'd have to really do their research, wouldn't they,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
on the specific time
Um,
period?
but yeah, so uh, in terms of costuming and things, it can be that they come from that background, or they come from a fashion background and they
Yeah.
get kind of shifted into film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would have obviously helped. I mean, obviously, we brought up a famous film designer who worked in film, which was Jean-Paul Gaultier, but that was also because his friend
Yeah.
is Luc Besson. So that was kind of that's a good example of how to not use your friends, but help your friends out because they they work in that industry and it's also a favor as well, and that they have knowledge on as well. But I'm trying to think. What's really funny is that with like the Edwardian films, for instance, like the famous Jane Austen films, like Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility. Um, did they wear? They must have worn corsets, no? Or was that? Yeah,
Yeah, I
they wore
think a
corsets.
lot of the times they did do, yeah. So you'll
Yeah.
often get actresses saying how uncomfortable it is because
Oh, what I was
you've
gonna
got to be
say. I mean, I remember
strapped in
wearing.
for several hours.
Yeah, and it's long periods of time, and you often hear them not complain but say how difficult it was. And I remember doing a play once and wearing one, and I was like, I can't sit in this corset and it's dressed. But the good thing about it is that it really helps your posture, but it's extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And
It
then you
helps your
got
posture, but not so much your
yeah,
breathing.
and especially when you're eating as well, not a good.
No, no.
But then the men's fashion then was very um restrictive, I guess you could say. They had the sort of tight trousers, and there's that famous shot of Colin Firth running out of the pond or whatever wet with his shirt on,
Yeah.
and had lots of women swooning over him in the 90s, going, "Hi, Colin, I love you." So yeah, but I don't know. Can you think of any other examples of costumes? Let's go on to makeup quickly, and then I think we'll wrap it up. So, think of any films that use striking makeup.
I think, well, there's so many different variations of makeup, isn't there? So
You
obviously
got
you can have,
prosthetics, and then you got
yeah, because
makeup.
you can start getting into the sort of realm of horror or even like, let's say Charlize Theron in that, was it Monster, where she played that famous serial killer.
Yeah,
So
but
obviously,
she packed on a ridiculous amount of weight to play her. So
yeah, and then
I
she
don't
had
actually think.
makeup on top on as well. So like
Yeah,
heavy,
yeah. So that helped.
yeah.
Um,
So playing real life characters, you might find that everyone that's played Nixon has had some kind of like prosthetic or makeup.
mm,
Gary Oldman has played Churchill, and he's had a few prosthetics here and there to make him a bit more, jowly and have a couple more chins. Yeah,
um,
and then horror makeup is something that I've always been quite interested in.
well, it is quite
Um,
fascinating, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
it takes a hell of a long time to apply. Like you hear stories about how they're in the makeup chair for like 4 hours or something.
yeah, sometimes even longer. It can be sort of 8, 9 hours.
Really?
Especially with like heavy prosthetics. Like Tim Curry did. Do you remember Legend with Tom Cruise? Where
No.
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at some of the images from that, Tim Curry basically plays this character that looks like the devil,
Okay.
and he's got heavy makeup on. But I mean, on screen it looks so impressive
Yeah.
because he's also got a bodysuit as well, so the makeup goes beyond the face and down to the body.
Yeah.
Um,
Did you
and he's
ever
got these
see
massive, enormous horns.
did you ever see it's gonna sound really embarrassing to bring up. But did you ever see the Rocky Horror Show?
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a little confession to make. I find him strangely very attractive in when he sings that song.
Well, I don't think you'd be alone in that. I
The
think,
track, I'm
yeah.
because he really gets away with that look. He's got the corset and the makeup. You think, this is a man. This is a man. But he's meant to be like, he's crossed over into, so you don't
Yeah.
know, like, but then the comments on YouTube or like from men are like, I'm a straight man, but dot, 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 kind of thing. Like, that's really funny comments. And he gets away with it. He looks amazing in that costume. And the makeup is it's very gothic-y, isn't it? It's very bright
It is,
with his
yeah.
eyes.
And he's always been sort of willing to do that kind of thing with his image because he did Pennywise the Clown as well, which
That's
is
another one I was
really,
going to bring up. That's
yeah,
a
really
very famous
famous
one
use of makeup.
for the makeup. Yeah,
Still scares me.
I hate clowns.
Well, I think most people hate clowns because of that film.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
That sort of stays in your. And I think with clowns, especially, I mean, this is makeup related. It's the permanent fixture of that smile on the face.
Yeah, and it's the very kind of bright white,
Yeah, it's like
it's almost ghostly. It doesn't look human, does it?
no,
So
and you don't know what's going on behind there. Does that make
yeah,
sense? You
yeah,
can't see the
exactly,
real
yeah.
facial expressions. And I don't know if you ever heard of this, because actually, if you think about makeup, is like kind of like wearing a mask on your face. If you think about it,
Yeah,
like those very famous masks you wear. For instance, you hear about how if you had one on for a long period of time, I think you'd find it quite. Like you hear about actors when they wear them, it's quite traumatic in a way.
yeah. I mean, it
Does
can
that
be
make
like that
sense?
with yeah, because some actors can find it quite traumatic playing certain characters as well.
Well, yeah, because
Yeah,
you're trapped in this thing that you can't show your face behind, and it's quite uh no, I guess claustrophobic. You could say claustrophobic, maybe.
yeah,
and isolating, and it, nobody can see what's going behind it. Oh, and actually, I thought of another good example of this. There's what's that famous black and white film? Is it The Phantom of the Opera, where she takes his mask off and she faints?
Yeah.
So that's kind of like another example of that, because you can't. She's like, she wants to see what's actually behind there, but she's too afraid. And then she realizes in that moment when she's finally done it that she really wishes she hadn't.
Yeah. I mean, there's this great Japanese horror film called Onibaba.
Mm-hmm.
There's these two women, a girl and her mother-in-law. The son and husband died in this war, killed by a samurai. So what they do is, anytime there's a wandering samurai come past, they kill them and rob them.
I'm
But-
trying to make this string on here.
Well, very good string. Okay. Okay. You're going to tie that in your room for your mummy.
I'm finished.
You're going to tie another one. Okay.
Baba, I will eat this.
Okay.
Oh, I love you, Lulu.
One.
Okay. So, so there's this one samurai that appears, and he comes in and he's got a mask on. And he never takes the mask off.
Uh-huh.
And eventually she does. She gets the mask off him after she kills him.
Mm-hmm.
And then she puts it on. And then after a while, she can't take it off either. And she kind of realizes that this strange disease that, basically he couldn't take his mask off because had this horrible kind of deformity that he'd got. And she basically catches it because she puts the mask on and won't take it off.
So I guess in a way she kind of inhabits being him then.
Yeah, she inhabits that, and she inhabits what's in the mask, and maybe who had it before as well.
Yeah.
But it's this really striking mask as well, quite famous, sort of, like Japanese operas and shows. They'd wear these very distinct masks.
Yeah. And
it's one of
like
those,
you're thinking, I was just thinking, because we're talking about masks, and there's, and also makeup, because makeup and masks are quite similar. The famous Beijing Opera.
Yeah.
Did you ever see any of those shows? I remember going to Beijing with my dad and sisters, and we tried to get tickets, but we couldn't, because it sells out really quickly, because it's a very popular thing for tourists to want to go and see. And obviously the makeup is striking. It's very white, and then they, put on these bright colours on their face. So that's like another good example of stage makeup, and I guess that carries over into film, really, doesn't it? You might have a lot.
So film geisha films and things like that as well, which has very kind of distinct and striking looks.
Yeah. Well, what's that famous film of Gong Li and Michelle? Yeah, was it the Last Concubine or?
So there is a film called The Last Concubine, Farewell My Concubine.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah, that was Leslie Chung, I think, wasn't it?
Oh, was it?
And they also Memoirs of a Geisha.
Oh, that was it. Yeah,
sorry. That's a bit more recent.
Yeah, or that kind of thing. So I think we've pretty much covered everything makeup wise. Can you think of any other films that you really like the makeup in?
They're mostly going to be horror films, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say quickly, because we're talking a long while ago, or it might have been with OD. So is it John Landis? Is it John Landis? Who did American Werewolf?
Yeah, John Landis. Yeah,
that's it. And Michael Jackson saw that film, didn't he? And decided to have him on Thriller. So they used the same special makeup person to do all the famous zombie makeup for Thriller.
Yeah, so I think very famous makeup. It might have been Rick Baker.
Well, I know that the person involved, I'm going to Google it quickly, is very famous for doing horror makeup.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a few guys like Rick Baker, Bob Keane, and a few others that just became so famous through the 80s for doing so many.
Oh yeah, it was Rick Baker. You're right.
Yeah,
it was Rick Baker.
Yeah, so they became really famous for just doing horror stuff.
Okay.
Really great makeup effects.
Yeah.
Yeah, really impressive.
Have you, quickly before we wrap up, have you ever worked on a film where they've had to use fake blood?
Well, I'd hope every film uses fake blood.
No, but have you ever had to, for instance, feel it or be around it? And what does it feel like? And what is it made of, actually? And I'm sure
I've
want to know what it's made of.
do you want a little story about how I wrecked my brother's flat with fake blood?
Go on then.
So we were shooting this short film, and because obviously you multitask and you do different things, I was in charge of making the fake blood.
Correct.
There's a scene where I cut my brother's throat and he sprays it everywhere across his wall, and
Lovely.
He's got white walls.
Okay.
So I made this mixture with some food coloring, some corn syrup or something, ketchup, the other things. It's quite a nice mixture. The only problem was it stained the wall and it wouldn't come off afterwards. So even there with bleaching and things, still see it faintly stuck on the walls. So yeah, long story short, don't ever put me in charge of makeup effects and blood, because it won't come out.
Oh, he must have loved you that day.
He did, yeah. So I think eventually it either got just a quick paint job over, or they might have got it out eventually.
It's great fun making that fake blood, though. Really, because I remember working on it.
It is, yeah.
It's so what do they put in it? It's like you said, corn syrup.
Yeah, so something to kind of thicken it slightly. Red food coloring. And I think you do have to be careful with which colorings and things you use, because some of them will stain.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think if I'm ever on set doing a horror film, because I've got a couple planned for next year, I'm gonna have to be very careful on what I use, because I don't want to sort of do this on a set and be paying a hefty bill at the end.
If it was a really low budget film, do you think there are any films that actually use ketchup because they're that low budget? Can you do that instead? Just squirt a bottle of ketchup into someone's face? Yeah,
you could do, but even ketchup's quite stainy, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, got to be careful with what you use.
Oh, all right. I think we've pretty much covered everything, to be honest.
Yeah, in fake blood. Yeah.
Yeah. So, is there anything you want to say before we finish?
No, I've had a good time. No, I think we've covered quite a lot today.
Yeah, I think we have. I'm gonna do a Christmas special with my sisters, and one of their boyfriends. So we can always do a show after that sometime. We'll think of what to do next. Maybe a not so nerdy version. Oh no, we were going to cover the process of film production and all that stuff. So maybe we can do that.
Yeah, that'd be a good one. Yeah, so that'd be a good one to do.
Another nerdy film one, and then we can do a sort of whatever specialized ones like Keanu or your Maggie. But we're definitely going to do a Chinese New Year one, aren't we?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
We'll do a Chinese New Year one for sure. All right then. Well, thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me back.
And we've done another very long show.
Yeah, 5-parter. Yeah,
it will keep people busy. Okay. Something to listen to while they've collapsed onto their beds after eating a ridiculous amount of food on Christmas Day.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah,
it's a good idea. Isn't it? They're like a python after eating so much rubbish.
Yeah, that's my idea of heaven, I think.
All right, well, I'll let you go. I'm sure you have to get back to Lulu. Cheeky monkey.
Yeah, she is cheeky.
Tell her I said hello. Today.
I will do.
Right. Okay. Talk to you soon, lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, see you later.
Bye.